There's been big news out of the US this week, with Ron DeSantis formally joining the race for the Republican nomination for president. Let's take a look at how he introduced himself.
We held the line when freedom hung in the balance. We showed that we can and must revitalize America. We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
Trump's fans are loyal, but surely the prospect of a presidential candidate that could unite the Republicans and then have a prospect of reaching out to undecided voters has to have some appeal, provided DeSantis is capable of turning out the base reliably. Let's bring in Sky contributor Kosha Gada to discuss what's next in the US. Thanks for joining me, Kosha. What most Australians would probably think as they look at the US right now is that the political division is so stark that it's becoming harmful to society generally. Is a non-Trump nominee necessary to overcome that trend?
Great to be with you, Amanda, as always. Many people do say that DeSantis is has the policy appeal of Trump, because Republicans do, by and large, like a lot of the things on Trump's policy agenda, but it's a policy appeal without the baggage. The thing is, the question, though, is that really what the prescription is that's needed right now? And I'm not so sure about that, because the issue that Ron DeSantis faces, he's really in a very unenviable position where he has to run and pry away that base, at 20, 30, 40% of the base that really, really, really loves Trump. And that is a necessary step that he needs to win in before he can then come across as the more appealing person without the baggage in the general. And it's really difficult to do that against somebody who's actually already been president. That's never happened before, rarely has happened before, I should say, once in 1892 with Grover Cleveland. He's the only U.S. president who's served 2 non-consecutive terms. And that's really a tall uphill battle, I think, for DeSantis. But if he can figure out a way to do that, he's starting to show some policy contrast where he's actually running to the right of Trump on some issues to pry away that base that Trump has a lock on. Then there's a path, for sure. There is a viable path for him, but it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, good point. We shouldn't let the Democrats off the hook here, though. They seem to be doing all they can to ensure that Trump is the nominee because a divisive candidate plays into their hands. But surely the country that leads the free world can do better than having a dementia patient to lead it.
That's true as well. And, the interesting thing on the Democrat Party that's not getting a lot of airplay is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. of the Kennedy family is running and currently is polling at about 20%, which is actually quite stunning because he's running against a sitting president. That's even more powerful than what we just discussed on the other side, running against a former president. And so that, I think, signals the weakness of the Biden-Harris ticket. Everybody knows it. I wouldn't be surprised if we see somebody else like a Gavin Newsom, governor of California, throw his hat into the ring and actually challenge Biden as well. But if not, I think everybody sort of looks at the candidate and who he is now, even with some sympathy, where, he's clearly past his prime, just cognitively and in terms of mental acuity. And it does suggest maybe that the U.S. has moved past into sort of a post-candidacy system of government where almost a candidate becomes less and less relevant, and it's more about the machine and how you're able to turn out the vote. And when you have, mass mail-in balloting, which was something that was turned on in the last couple of years on a much faster clip, there's a whole system about how to do that because we don't have mandatory voting in the U.S. And those kinds of things is what leads to the outcomes rather than how qualified the candidate is, which is kind of worrying, but I think that's where we are.
This week, the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People issued a warning to African American people in the US that they should not travel to Florida because it is not safe for them under DeSantis' leadership. This week, I asked Amy Horowitz about the evidence that was being cited to justify this warning. After all, you'd think there'd have to be a serious risk to the safety of Black Americans to justify such a move. Have a look at what he said.
Wow. The NAACP and, frankly, even the ADL has zero credibility with me, and this just cements it. Blue cities like Chicago, which has recently been named the murder capital of the U.S., which has more Black people killed per capita than almost anywhere else in the country, how come they're not condemning Chicago?
What does this move from the NAACP tell us about the partisanship of public organisations in the US and how it will affect the ability of the Republicans to earn the support of African American people across the country.
You know, that what we just talked about in the previous topic, Amanda, is exactly, this is just showing that plain as day about how divisive the country has become, sadly, at every level, not just in politics, but even all sorts of bodies or nonprofits like the NAACP ostensibly is meant to be. Facts don't matter. I think we can cite the crime statistics of Chicago or Baltimore or West Philly and all sorts of places relative to Florida. We know that. I think the top 25 cities by crime, not a single Floridian city is in that list, so we can point to that, but unfortunately it doesn't matter. They sort of just put this stuff out there. It was quite brazen. And in terms of what it says about uniting that base, that is really a fascinating part of the U.S. electorate. It is African Americans is the one group that is really, really in lockstep, reliably, always votes Democrat to the tune of 90 to 92%. No other bloc, not women, not Hispanics, no other bloc has it that much, 92% voting one way. And they know that that's the Democrats' electoral strategy really hinges on that. If any of that gets peeled away, then the math doesn't work out that well for them. And so that's always been a longstanding strategy, but they've had a lock on it for a long time. And I think these kinds of measures are just meant to shore that up because they know how important that voting bloc is.
Well, that's interesting. Finally, President Joe Biden and House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy appear to have reached an agreement in principle to deal with the looming debt ceiling. They've got until June 5 to have it sorted out. Now, Kosha, a US default would be catastrophic, but isn't the ever-growing level of US debt catastrophic too? It is out of control, $31 trillion. The cost of financing the debt right now with where current interest rates are is approaching, it's like $500 billion. It's approaching the size of the Department of Defense, just to put it into context. This is not sustainable. It is saddling future generations or people who haven't even been born yet with something that they mathematically will not be able to pay back. And absolutely, there are all sorts of consequences from this. The U.S. could default just because it's never happened before doesn't mean it never will. It could lose its status as a reserve currency. That would be catastrophic, both to the wealth of Americans as well as the ripple effect that it would send all across the globe with international markets and more. So this is, even when they've reached this agreement, that's great, but it's really sort of just around the margins in terms of what the spending cuts that they agreed to in the compromise supposedly are. Nothing significant, nothing structural, and this continues and it cannot last forever. Something is going to happen at some point.